Pokemon. I can't just explain Pokemon to you. After 29 years of existence, people just know what Pokemon is by now. It's the highest grossing multimedia franchise of all time, so there's absolutely no way this is your first exposure into the world of Pokemon. If you don't know what Pokemon is, then this video is probably not for you. So there's two things before we get into it. One, I am doing this completely on my own, with literally just my phone and my iPad. So background gameplay is either stuff I filmed on my own, or it'll be from official game trailers like this one. There might also be some official images, stuff from the show, and little doodles I made. The end goal being to only use things that are fair use and not infringe on anyone's copyright. To be honest, I'm probably already screwed from all the music I'm gonna use, but I have to at least make the effort. The second thing is probably pretty obvious, but this is my first time doing anything like this. I've been into Pokemon for nearly 10 years, and I wanted to do something special to celebrate the occasion. Like I said, I am using my phone, so the audio is going to be terrible. But apart from that, I'm pretty happy with how this video turned out. And with all that out of the way, this is my Pokemon journey. I didn't really know Pokemon was a thing until after this date. In 2008, March 29th was a Saturday, so let me paint you a picture of what I was doing. This was the layout of my room. There was a shelf in the corner, a TV on top, a desk in the other corner, and I had this cool little beanbag couch. I was 5 years old at the time, and keep in mind there's only really 3 ways someone can experience Pokemon. There's the toys, the shows, and the games. Since I didn't know what it was at the time, I obviously wasn't into the toys, and I wasn't allowed to have video games as a kid, which I have a lot to say about, but we'll come back to that later. Television would have been my only option to experience Pokemon back then. So, 5 years old, just started kindergarten, and weekends actually start to mean something. I'm flipping through channels, looking for something to watch, like any normal 5-year-old would have back then. And on this day, Cartoon Network just so happened to be playing Bakugan. I loved Bakugan. This is the episode that was playing that morning. The episode was already playing for a couple minutes and I started it right about here. It was definitely new at the time and I remember because the Cartoon Network logo said so. This episode showed me what Bakugan was all about. You throw a little ball, it opens on the card, and then it becomes a giant monster. And while most of them are silent, some Bakugan can talk. I seriously can't understate how cool I thought this was as a kid. I mean, just look at the toys. The show was made basically just to sell these, but at least it wasn't some novelty thing. They look and function exactly like they do in the show, and that was a huge selling point for me. So yeah, I learned about Bakugan before I even knew what Pokemon was. Though it wouldn't be long before I found out what it was thanks to Cartoon Network's sister channel, Boomerang. This was my first exposure to Pokemon. I can still remember the guy saying, "If you wanna catch 'em all." I mean, that voice line is iconic. But still, I never watched Pokemon because I couldn't help but compare it to Bakugan. I mean, they had similar names, each had unique monsters, and they both had balls. I'm not sure I knew anything more than that at the time, but I guess it was enough for me to decide that Pokemon seemed like a cheap ripoff of Bakugan. Which, I mean, the opposite of that is probably true, but who knows, I'm not gonna look it up. The only Pokemon clip I ever saw was years later. The heroes are just minding their own business and then Meowth shows up, and I think he was hurt, and he asked them for help. I'm almost positive this clip came from one of the movies, but I haven't been able to identify which one even after all these years. If anyone knows, please tell me, it's bothered me forever. But anyway, Bakugan didn't last very long, or I should say good Bakugan didn't last very long. The original series only had 4 seasons with the final episode being aired in January of 2012, and I'm pretty sure I stopped actively watching after season 3, so I checked out way before this. Despite Bakugan's short lifespan, I still didn't get into Pokemon right away. I may not have been allowed to have video games as a kid, but that did not mean I didn't want them. The daycare I went to growing up had a bunch of them for the kids to use. They kept all of them in one of those portable classrooms that schools usually have. If you're not from California, you probably don't know what I'm talking about. I also had 2 cousins who both had video game systems when we were kids, so I absolutely knew what I was missing out on. My older cousin had either an Xbox or a PlayStation. I didn't really play video games with him because all he had were games that I wasn't interested in, like Grand Theft Auto and Call of Duty. And even if I was interested in playing those games, I was the little cousin. All I could do was watch. My other cousin, however, had a Wii, And this time, I was the older cousin. Which means not only did I want to play, I actually got to. Whenever I went over to his house, I would always ask to play New Super Mario Bros. Wii. The New Soup games get a lot of flack, but I love them. Going from world to world with each one having a different theme was an adventure I very much enjoyed. I loved it so much I even made these little cakes that they used to represent each world in the game. The point is, I loved video games and I really wanted a console of my own. I should mention it wasn't just the Wii I was interested in. My little cousin also had a DS and an iPod Touch. Again, my little cousin. He was younger than me and he had 3 things that every kid my age at the time seemed to have at least one of, while I had nothing. Imagine how I felt on his birthdays when he would get game after game after game. All the while, I'm just hoping that the early 2010s internet doesn't make loading Flash games abysmally slow. Now you might be thinking, gee, why weren't you allowed to have video games? Well, the answer is interesting, because the person in my life who hated video games is also the same person in my life who had no problem with me watching Family Guy at 7 years old, my dad. My dad's stance on video games didn't budge no matter how hard I tried. Whenever I asked, he just said that video games would rot my brain and make me lazy. I don't know if I was the most active kid, but I certainly wasn't the least. I touched grass from time to time, and I played Flash games on the family computer for hours at a time on weekends, and he never had a problem with that. Even back then, I knew that the rot your brain argument really didn't hold water. Now, I'm sure this is making me sound like a spoiled brat, but I understood that video games were a privilege. I kept my grades up, and I was generally a good kid. And I basically already had video games because I played Flash games on the computer all the time. I was even willing to pay for a console with my own allowance and have my parents take it away from me if my grades ever started to slip. But no matter how much I bent over backwards, that was a battle I was just never gonna win. At least that was the case until I got my first phone on Christmas 2012, the iPhone 4. I think all I wanted was a simple flip phone, so getting an iPhone 4 in place of that was very surprising. I had been asking for something like this for years at this point, so finally getting it felt amazing. I know this was a pretty long tangent, but I hope now it's clear why it took me so long to get into Pokemon. I could have been into it, but I had some little vendetta against the show and I wasn't allowed to play video games. And even if I was, I probably would have only played Mario games since those were the only ones I had any interest in playing. But none of that mattered now. I had finally earned myself an electronic device and I was very happy with it. So with all that in mind, I can finally talk about the day that I got into Pokemon. Unfortunately, I don't have the exact day I got into Pokemon. It was either on or after this date. At this point, I had had a phone for 2.5 years, and as much as I loved it when I first got it, the novelty had kinda worn off. Don't get me wrong, I loved having my own phone, but making my own calls and texts was really the only new thing it brought to the table. Everything else I was able to do before. Before I got the iPhone, my parents had games on theirs that I would always play, and the aforementioned family computers where I watched all my YouTube up until that point. But having that iPhone meant that I had access to YouTube wherever and whenever I wanted. I was able to shift from silly one-off videos to more serialized content. I would watch so many Let's Plays of my favorite Mario games. Those Let's Plays are the reason I know every inch of those games. There's only so many Let's Plays you can watch in 2.5 years though, so that's kinda where I'm at. I had done pretty much everything I could do with that phone, so now I was looking for something new. And wouldn't you know it, on April 25th-ish, 2015, I would find something new. I was watching TV in my room, unimportant to the story but completely different house. I remember it was dark and I was just looking for something to watch. I don't know if DirecTV had just recorded Pokemon episodes thinking I might like them or if it was on live TV, but the episode Under the Pledging Tree was playing in front of my eyes. When this episode came on, I remember thinking to myself, I have written off this series numerous times over the years. I feel like doing something different. Let me see just exactly what I've been writing off. The beginning starts off pretty standard. Everyone's getting ready to go to the pledging tree and give gifts to their Pokemon. I definitely remember Ash being unable to catch this Dunsparce because he forgot his Pokeballs. And this whole battle scene with Team Rocket near the end was just unbelievably awesome. Team Rocket blasts off, everybody exchanges their gifts, and this episode undeniably leaves me wanting more. I'm almost certain I watched the very next episode, a showcase debut, immediately after this. This episode focused more on Serena. It's her very first Pokemon showcase and her Fennekin trips on its outfit and loses the competition. But she doesn't blame herself or her Pokemon. It instead lights this fire in her that makes her want to do better. She decides it's time to do something different, and she makes the huge decision to cut off her hair. Die-hard X and Y fans already know this, but for those of you who don't, I cannot stress how pivotal this episode is. She shows her friends, and then it's time for everyone to move on to the next city so Ash can get his next gym badge. Now, I very quickly glossed over those 2 episodes, but I'm not exaggerating when I say they changed my life. The very first Pokemon episodes I ever watched, and these were the ones. If Cartoon Network hadn't played these episodes, I'm not certain I ever would have gotten into Pokemon. I said that Serena cutting her hair was a pivotal point in the series, but to be honest, I don't even really know that myself. I immediately stopped watching X and Y after this because I said to myself, okay, Pokemon is awesome. But if I'm gonna get into this series, I need to get into this series. I don't want to start off halfway through X and Y, I want to see what happens from the very beginning. And thanks to Netflix having Pokemon Indigo League, I started a nearly 3-year journey of watching every Pokemon episode ever. A journey that I never actually completed, but had fun with nonetheless. Everyone knows the first episode of Pokemon. It's cool, iconic, everybody loves it, and so did I. I'm really glad this episode opens the way it does because it really cements that it's the first episode of the series. I remember doubting that this was the first episode because Pokemon Indigo League sounds like a sequel series, sort of like Ben 10 Alien Force. You all know what happens next. He steals Misty's bike, he stands up to the Spearow, and Ho-Oh appears before him. They even made a movie about it. I had watched this episode and the very next one the Sunday night before I was supposed to go back to school. I remember being so excited to watch episode 3 that I woke up just as the sun was rising so I could watch it on my phone under the covers. Because of that, this episode forever will have an early morning vibe for me. It's just so nostalgic seeing Ash and Misty in Viridian Forest, it just gives me that feeling, you know? My initial goal when I was watching the entire series was to try to get back up to speed as soon as possible. But being that the X and Y episodes I watched were like the 850th episodes of the entire series, yeah, there was no way that was going to happen unless I watched like 3 episodes a day. Which didn't sound all that bad to me, but the thing is, it got hard to find episodes after a while. Netflix only had Indigo League, and I was lucky to find pretty much every episode re-uploaded in this format on YouTube, but I would very often find episodes missing, and sometimes the anti-piracy measures were just too much. So while I was pretty consistent with my goal of watching 3 episodes a day, there were times where I just wasn't able to be. Beyond just watching the series, I did other things because of Pokemon as well. Using the computer I got from my school, I was able to play Pokemon Red on an emulator I found online. I got decently far, and it's pretty cool that I get to say that Red was my first Pokemon game. I never finished it because I had to keep the tab open at all times. If the computer reloaded, I was going to lose all my progress, so I had to keep that tab open for weeks. And the school year was almost over, so I had to get the laptop back soon anyway. But now I'm at the point where I get to talk about the videos I made on this channel specifically because of Pokemon. Yay. Now here you can see a very prime example of a most likely neurodivergent child who definitely didn't have any friends, posting his prepubescent face all over the internet for the world to see. In addition to the Pokédex, you might have noticed this stuff on the shelf back here. Apart from the big Pokeballs, everything else is something I made. I've sort of honed my craft over the years, so unfortunately I don't have the originals anymore, but I do have the new ones I've made. I was obsessed with how the Pokeballs get all small in the show, so I wanted to make one of each Pokeball just to have. I still have quite a few to make. Whenever Ash got a new Pokédex in the show, I would always make it as soon as I could. The driving force behind all these projects being that I think licensed products are often bulky and look nothing like they do in the show, so I take it upon myself to remedy that. I've made it abundantly clear by now, but Pokemania hit me like a truck. The show was great, I loved making my crafts, it felt like it couldn't get any better. And then it got better. Pokemon Go! Not 6 months after becoming a Pokemon fan, Nintendo drops this trailer. The excitement I had for this trailer is beyond anything I've ever had in my entire life. It felt like destiny. A brand new mobile game that everyone's excited for from a franchise that I just got into? Incredible. I'm going to talk about Pokemon Go in detail a bit later, but for now I'll just say that it was the catalyst to the deception that my mother and I played on my father. I was tired of not having a game console of my own, so somehow, I was able to convince my mom to go behind my dad's back and get me a Wii U for Christmas. Throughout the years, I always knew that if I ever was going to get a game console, it would have been through my mom. The plan was for the two of us to go grocery shopping a few days before Christmas so I could pick out a Wii U and hide it in my room. Now, my mom has a tendency to be 100% on board with something and then gradually have reality set in and slowly back out of it. We made this plan around September, so that would have been plenty of time between then and Christmas for her to get cold feet. But luckily, this wasn't one of those times. In fact, the closest she ever got to backing out of the plan was maybe around Thanksgiving. She said that instead of a Wii U, maybe I could get a 3DS instead because that would have been easier to hide in my backpack or under a pillow. Now, I had to think about this for a moment because I knew the 3DS had Pokemon games, but I wouldn't have been able to play the Mario games I've wanted to play for years if I went with the 3DS instead. Ultimately, I decided I didn't want to settle, and I ended up with my Mario Maker Wii U. Now, as you can see, I was a very happy camper, and if you go back to the original video, I actually touch on a lot of things I talked about here. I liked getting my phone, but I loved getting this Wii U. I have a lot of great memories with that console, like playing Mario Wii with my siblings, but more than that, I was just glad because it finally felt like I was being listened to for the first time in my life. My dad did find out about it shortly after, but he didn't take it away, because I kept my grades up and I remained a good person. It's almost as if that whole rot your brain argument was complete bull. Okay, I'm kidding. I was never actually that mad about it, but if I was, it was justified because I proved myself. Now, I got my Wii U at pretty much the end of its life cycle, and due to the nature of both consoles, I'd say it died even sooner than the 3DS, because literally 2 months after I got my Wii U, Pokémon Sun and Moon were announced. I don't know if I was that excited for these games, mostly because I didn't have a 3DS, but it was cool to see the first announcement of the newest Pokemon game since I got into the series, though I do remember this announcement sort of kicking me into high gear. At this point, I think I was maybe midway through the third generation of the anime, so I had a lot of ground to cover up if I wanted to catch up, especially before the new games came out. But my family had just moved into a new house, I was weeks away from graduating 8th grade, and Pokemon Frickin' Go was right around the corner. I had a little time to get up to the 4th generation of the anime, but once July hit, all I could think about was Pokemon Go. The game has changed a lot since it first released, and it'll never be as popular as it was back in the summer of 2016, but it's still a lot of fun. The game started with only the original 151 Pokemon, which was really lucky for me because I started with Kanto myself. Anyone who's played Pokemon Go from day one knows that the game started off pretty barren, so I don't really have a lot to say about the first summer that I played it. But to be honest, words don't do this game justice anyway. The summer of 2016 just has a feeling to it that hasn't been replicated by anything since. If you never experienced it, go try to find some videos from that era because you really just had to be there. I don't know how it works for the Midwest or East Coast schools, but I started my first day of high school on August 10th. So after that month of Pokemon Go, things slowed down for me considerably. I wasn't able to watch as many episodes because of school, and I officially missed my deadline because, spoiler alert, on November 5th, 2016, America gets the episode where Ash loses the Lumiose Conference. But don't worry, the world would get far worse news 3 days later. In all honesty, I think I already knew that he lost because Japan got the episode back in August, but the whole point of binging the series was to get back up to X and Y before this happened, so once I knew about it, it kind of took the wind out of my sails. I stopped watching episodes as much as I did, and I focused on other things, which honestly ended up being kind of a good thing because a lot of new things came out around this time. The Nintendo Switch was revealed in October, the Sun and Moon games came out in November, and the first episode of the Sun and Moon anime premiered in December. With both the anime and the games being new, it's safe to say that the Gen 6 era was officially over. The first episode may have been in December, but the Sun and Moon anime didn't start airing regularly until May of 2017. Maybe it's because I spent so much time away from Pokemon that I was ready to get back into it, or I didn't want to miss out on a new thing, but I started watching the Sun and Moon anime and it was honestly really good. There was a period of time where I was watching both the Gen 4 and the Gen 7 animes at the same time, and I still haven't finished either of them. I did get a Switch on Christmas that year though, and Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee were revealed not long after, but I didn't like how these games used ghost catching mechanics. They just didn't feel like real Pokemon games. So as much as I would have loved to be a part of the 7th generation of games, I completely skipped over it. But the moment this trailer dropped, I knew it wouldn't be long before I got into the next. Gen 8's Pokemon Sword and Shield. These games were my real debut generation. This was going to be the first generation of games that I had access to. And what a generation to begin with! This was going to be the first generation of games to not be on a handheld and instead be on a home console, so it had to be big. I watched the trailer ad nauseum, counting the days before it was time for me to finally get my copy. As soon as the announcement trailer dropped, I already knew which version I was getting. I didn't look at which version had the better Pokemon or anything. No, there was really only one thing driving me to pick the version that I did, and it was basically just...
If you must make a choice between a sword or a shield, take the shield!
So yeah, I chose Pokemon Shield, mostly because I didn't want Sword. I mean, Zacian's sword being inside of his mouth instead of part of his body like the shield is for Zamazenta is just stupid. I know he's better competitively, but who cares, that's how I feel. So yeah, Pokemon Shield was the very first mainline Pokemon game that I ever completed. Sort of. Now, I don't remember too much about this save file, but I just know that my first time playing this game, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I didn't really know the type chart beyond the obvious fire, water, grass, so I just chose the moves the game told me were super effective. That, coupled with the fact that XP share is permanent, meant that I had no problem getting through this game. I beat the game so fast, and I really wasn't interested in getting every Pokemon, so until the DLC announcement trailer, I really didn't touch this game after that. I know I'm kind of going through things faster than I was at the beginning of the video, so just to remind you of where I'm at, I was a semester away from graduating high school at this point. The first part of the DLC came out just after I graduated, so I had a lot of time to play it. Of course, that wasn't the only reason I had a lot of time to play it. Now, I really wish I had more to say about the DLC, but to be honest, I didn't even finish the first part of it. I last saved the game in November of that year, but to be honest, I don't really know what I did that day because I'm pretty sure I put the DLC down like a day or two after I got it. And that's kind of where my initial saga with Pokemon ends. I never played the second part of the DLC because I never completed the first, and it's not like I didn't have time. I took a gap year when the world shut down. I had time to do anything, and I just didn't. There's probably a number of factors as to why I stopped. I had just turned 18, the world was shut down, life was just moving in a weird direction, you know? After I put down the DLC, I didn't touch Pokemon for years. Not the games, not the anime. But that's not where the story ends. A lot has happened in the past 4 years. I got my first job in May of 2021, and I signed up for community college just 6 months after that. I had really been focusing on both work and school, so I didn't even realize that the 3DS eShop was shutting down until about February of 2023. Knowing that I only had 2 months before time ran out gave me just the kick I needed. For years, I had wanted to play every game in the series, and now I finally had the tools at my disposal to do so. But if I wanted to get Pokemon from the 3rd generation all the way up to home, I had to get a 3DS right away. I got 2 3DS consoles so I could trade with myself, and let me tell you, it was very close. The eShop officially closed on March 27th, 2023, and I downloaded everything and all the updates I needed literally hours before it went down. I got very lucky. But now that I had gotten that time-sensitive requirement out of the way, I really didn't think about it much after that. But when I did start playing, I decided I wanted to start with the original games, and when I say that, I mean I played Pokemon Red on an official cartridge. Which proved to be a horrible mistake because it's so easy to lose your save files on those cartridges, and it happened to me. Twice. I don't even know what happened the first time, I just nicked the cartridge and it erased everything. It's what prompted me to buy this, a little device that hooks up to my computer so I can back up my saves so it never happens again. But then it happened again. Now, admittedly this one was more my fault, but it still sucked, dude. It was late at night and I was grinding because I just needed one more Pokemon to complete the Pokédex so I could get the diploma and never have to play the game again. I had played for so long that the battery light had started flashing, meaning that I had like a minute to get to the charger. The battery died mid-save, which meant another game lost. Now I didn't lose everything because I had backed up the save a few times, but it had been a while since I did it, so I lost like 10 or 12 hours worth of gameplay. I was so ready to be done with those games, so I stayed up all night, I reloaded my last save, and I did the missing no glitch so I can get everything up back to where I was as fast as possible. But I did it, and it only took 5 more hours than it should have. After that whole fiasco, I played Crystal for a little bit, but I never finished that game either because my second year of community college was coming to a close and I had a lot of work to get done. And despite finishing community college in May and having months of free time, I still didn't even think about Pokemon until the end of the year. But the moment I discovered Delta, that all changed. Delta was amazing. I really didn't play the games that much because I had to carry around a Game Boy to play them because I had the physical cartridges, but being able to transport the ROMs and just put them on my phone and play them on Delta made it so much easier. On the first of this year, I began a playthrough of Pokemon Yellow and I beat the game with Ash's original team. And then I moved on to Silver and I finally finished the Johto games. I was even able to do the Celebi coin case glitch, which felt amazing. It was about midway through my Silver playthrough that I realized that the 10-year anniversary of me being into Pokemon was coming up, and that's when I got the inspiration to do this entire video. And with the trailer for Pokemon Legends ZA coming out on Pokemon Day this year, I knew it was time for me to finally start getting things done. I own every mainline Pokemon game, no I'm not kidding, so my goal is to play at least one game from every generation before Legends ZA comes out. But I don't want to just play each generation. No, I want to collect every Pokemon from their respective generation and move every single one of them up to home. The third generation of games have been so much better than the first two, so I can't wait to get to the fourth. I don't know if I'll be able to get every Pokemon up to home before ZA, but I'll definitely play every single game before it comes out. And that's all for now. If you made it this far in the video, seriously thank you, and if you liked it, maybe hit the subscribe button. It doesn't help me because I'm not monetized, but you still could. This video was a lot of fun to make. I poured my heart and soul into it because I really wanted to make something special. And who knows, maybe I'll do more stories in the future. But until that day, I guess I'll catch you later.